The distress beacon had been broadcasting for 11 hours before anyone answered it. This was not unusual. The outer reaches were exactly what the name suggested, the fringe of mapped space where supply routes thinned and response times stretched from hours into days, and sometimes into the specific silence that meant no one was coming. Ships that broke down in the outer reaches had two options: fix themselves or accept the mathematics of the situation. The Vorrkai freighter Endless Meridian had been attempting option 1 for 9 of those 11 hours. It had not been going well. Chief Engineer Sova pressed 3 of her 6 hands against the primary conduit housing and felt the ship shudder beneath her touch like something alive and failing. The Vorrkai were engineers by culture. Their homeworld had no natural resources worth speaking of, which had produced over several thousand years a species with 6 arms, exceptional spatial reasoning, and a relationship with machinery that bordered on spiritual. Sova had been fixing ships since she was old enough to reach the panels, which among Vorrkai was considered early even by their standards. She had never seen anything like this. The cascade failure had started in the secondary coolant system, which should have been containable. It was not containable because someone, she had strong suspicions about who, had been rerouting power from the coolant backup to boost cargo capacity, which was profitable and also catastrophically illegal under 18 separate shipping regulations. The rerouting had held for 4 months. Then it hadn't. The failure had jumped from coolant to propulsion to life support in 47 minutes, which was fast even for a cascade. The ship was now running on emergency reserves that her calculations suggested would last another 6 hours. After that, the atmosphere processors would fail, and the mathematics would become personal. Her crew of 12 was doing everything they could. Everything they could was not enough. The Vorrkai were exceptional engineers, but they were freighter engineers. Cargo capacity optimization, standard maintenance, routine diagnostics. This was not routine. This was the kind of compounding failure that required either a miracle or a specialist, and miracles had a poor response time in the outer reaches. The distress beacon had been her second option. When the response came, it was not what she expected. The ship that answered was small, human-sized, which meant genuinely small by galactic standards. A 2-person scout vessel that the registry identified as the persistent question, which Sova found either reassuring or concerning depending on what question it was persistently asking. It had dropped out of transit within visual range of the Meridian and requested docking clearance with the specific calm of someone who had not fully assessed the situation yet, or someone who had assessed it completely and simply wasn't bothered. Endless Meridian, this is Marcus Hale, independent contractor, responding to your beacon. The voice on the comm was human male, middle register, unhurried. What are we looking at? Sova pulled up the damage report on her secondary screen, the one that was still working. Cascade failure originating in secondary coolant has propagated to primary propulsion, backup propulsion, life support processor 2 and 3. Life support processor 1 is functional. Emergency reserves at 61% and depleting at approximately 10% per hour. A pause, not a long one. So 6 hours, approximately. Crew? 12. All functional. Cargo? Sova hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Standard freight. Another pause, longer this time, with a quality she was learning to associate with humans thinking about something they've decided not to press on yet. I'm going to need full access to your engineering systems. Every panel, every diagnostic, every log, including the ones you'd rather I didn't see. I work faster when I'm not discovering things I wasn't told about. Understood, Sova said. And I work alone. Your engineers stay out of my way unless I ask for something specific. They won't like that. I know. 6 hours, you said? Approximately. Then they cannot like it quietly. Hail out. He docked 7 minutes later. Sova met him at the airlock because she was the captain and the chief engineer, and right now the only person on the ship who was not either panicking or performing a very convincing impression of not panicking. The airlock cycled and Marcus Hale stepped through with a kit bag over one shoulder and the expression of someone arriving at a job site, which was what this was, except that the job site was dying. He was average height for a human, which made him short by galactic standards. Brown skin, dark hair, a scar along his left jawline that had the specific character of a burn rather than a cut. Work clothes, worn at the knees and elbows in the pattern of someone who spent significant time on floors and in tight spaces. He looked at the airlock corridor, at Sova's 6 arms, at the diagnostic screen on the wall showing the cascade failure progression, and at the emergency lighting that had replaced the normal panels, and his expression didn't change at all. "Show me the coolant system first," he said. "The original failure point," Sova led him. As they moved through the ship, she watched him observe. Not obviously, not with the wide-eyed scanning of someone taking in an unfamiliar environment, but with the peripheral, constant attention of someone building a picture from everything that wasn't the thing they were looking at directly. He noted the age of the conduit housing. He noted the wear patterns on the floor near the power junctions. He noted, she was certain, the places where the official ship configuration didn't quite match the physical reality of how the power had actually been routed. He said nothing about any of it. The secondary coolant housing was in the lower engineering deck, accessible through a crawl space that the Vorrkai used rarely because their 6 arms made the tight quarters awkward. Humans, with their 2 arms and apparently total comfort with confined spaces, had no such problem. Hale dropped to his knees, clicked on a handheld light, and went in without being asked. Sova waited outside. She heard him moving, heard the specific sounds of someone who knew what they were doing. No hesitation, no backing up, direct movement from point to point. After 4 minutes, he came back out and sat on the floor with his kit bag and started pulling components before she'd said anything. "Talk me through the rerouting," he said. Sova was quiet for a moment. "I'm not certain what you mean." "The power rerouting from coolant backup to cargo capacity enhancement." He didn't look up from the components he was sorting. "Someone did it carefully. Good work, actually. It's held longer than it should have. But the connection points have a signature. 4 months, give or take." "Approximately," Sova said, which was becoming her word for things she didn't want to be precise about. "Okay." He still didn't look up. "I'm not a regulator. I'm not filing a report. But I need to know the full configuration of how the power was actually running, not how it's supposed to be running, because if I restored a factory spec without accounting for what was changed, I'm going to miss failure points and will cascade again in about 40 minutes, which helps no one." Sova sat down on the floor across from him, which was not something she did often, and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once and went back to his components and said, "Okay," again in the same tone as the first time, which she found either very reassuring or completely unreadable. Among humans, she was learning, these were sometimes the same thing. "First problem is the coolant housing crack," he said, working as he talked. "That's the origin point, and it's physical damage, which means I'm not patching it, I'm replacing it. I have the components." He held up a part she recognized as Vorrkai standard, which was unexpected. "Second problem is the power junction at Section 7, which wasn't in the original failure report. Section 7 hasn't failed." "Not yet." He set the component down. "But it's going to. The rerouting put stress on the junction in a way that the original configuration didn't account for, and it's been running hot for 4 months. It's going to go within the next 2 hours without intervention, and when it goes, it takes life support processor 1 with it. The only working life support processor. Sova's secondary arms, which among Vorrkai moved independently when under stress, made a gesture she didn't entirely intend. "That wasn't in our diagnostics. Your diagnostics were looking at the factory configuration. Section 7 isn't in the factory configuration." He picked the component back up. "It's fine. That's why you called someone." He paused. "Do you have a 3mm Vorrkai hex driver?" "Mine is stripped." She had one in her personal kit. She went and got it. When she came back, he had already removed the damaged coolant housing, which should have taken 2 engineers 20 minutes, and was examining the connection points with the handheld light. He took the hex driver without looking up and said, "Thank you," in the absent way of someone whose attention is fully somewhere else and the social portion of their brain is running on a separate thread. Sova sat back down. "How long have you been doing this? Fixing ships?" "Working alone in the outer reaches." He was quiet for a moment, fitting the new housing into position with movements so precise they looked slow. 8 years, give or take. You came from somewhere before that. Yes. He didn't elaborate, and something in the way he didn't elaborate closed the subject without hostility. Sova had met enough humans to recognize the difference between someone who didn't want to talk about something and someone who was being evasive. This was the first kind, which she respected and left alone. "The Section 7 junction," she said instead. "Can you reach it from here?" "No. I'll need to go through the maintenance channel on the port side after I finish this. There's about 40 minutes of work here and then probably an hour at the junction, depending on the damage." He fitted the final connection and reached for a calibration tool. "Then we need to restart the coolant system in sequence, which means bringing propulsion back online in stages. If we rush that part, we'll spike the power load and lose the junction before I've had time to stabilize it." "How long total?" He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating but calculating, which felt different. 3 hours. Maybe less if the junction damage is surface level. Definitely less if your engineers can prep the propulsion restart sequence while I'm working on the junction, so I'm not doing both. I thought you worked alone. I work alone on the diagnostic and repair. Prep work I can delegate." He looked up for the first time since entering the crawl space. His eyes were dark, brown, unhurried, looking at her with the same quality of attention he gave the machinery. Not performing assessment, actually assessing. "Your crew is good. They're just working with incomplete information about what actually failed and why. Give them the full picture and they'll be useful." Sova thought about the 4 months of power rerouting and the 18 shipping regulations and the specific look the Vorrkai shipping authority gave when they found discrepancies. "The full picture involves some details I'd rather." "I know." He went back to the calibration. "Tell them what they need to know to prep the restart sequence. Leave out what you want to leave out. I'll manage the rest." She looked at him for a moment. "You do this a lot. Work on ships where the official version and the actual version are different." "Outer reaches," he said, as if that were a complete answer. She supposed it was. The coolant housing replacement took him 38 minutes. Sova spent that time briefing her engineers on the restart sequence, watching their expression cycle through relief that someone was fixing it and professional offense that an outsider had identified the Section 7 problem before they had. Her second engineer, Prav, who was 20 years into his career and had opinions about his own competence, took it particularly hard. "He found Section 7 in 4 minutes?" Prav said. "He found it by understanding the actual power configuration," Sova said carefully. Prav's middle arms, the ones that moved when he was processing something uncomfortable, shifted. "Ah," he said, which meant he understood exactly what configuration she was referring to and would not be asking further questions. "Prep the restart sequence," Sova said. "Have it ready when he asks for it." When Hale emerged from the lower deck and moved toward the port maintenance channel, he stopped at the engineering station where Prav was working and looked at the restart sequence Prav had prepared and said, "Good. Add a 30-second delay between propulsion stages 2 and 3. The junction needs to stabilize between loads." He said it the way he said everything. Not dismissive, not complimentary, just accurate. And Prav added the delay and said nothing, and Hale went into the maintenance channel. The next hour was the strange quiet of a crisis that has been handed to someone competent. Sova found this harder to navigate than the crisis itself. During the crisis, there was always something to do. Another system to monitor, another calculation to run, another decision to make. With Hale in the maintenance channel working on the junction, there was nothing to do but watch the emergency reserve percentage and listen to the sounds of someone who knew what they were doing. At 40 minutes, she heard him say, through the intercom, "Sova, here. Junction damage is deeper than surface level. There's a secondary fracture in the power coupling that I didn't catch from the initial assessment." A pause. "Still fixable. But I need 15 more minutes, and I need someone to hold the coupling in position while I work. 2 hands minimum. Among the Vorrkai, this was never a problem. Hale had 2 hands. "I'll come in," Sova said. The port maintenance channel was tight, even by outer reaches standards. Designed for the ship's automated maintenance systems, not for organic engineers. Sova was smaller than most Vorrkai, which helped. She moved through the channel on her primary arms and found Hale in a section she would not have described as a workspace. It was barely large enough for him to turn around in. He was lying on his back in a space between two power conduits, holding a light in his teeth and working on the junction coupling with both hands, and apparently the complete absence of discomfort about any of this. "Left side," he said, around the light. "The secondary coupling. I need you to hold it in position while I fasten the anchor bolts. If it shifts while I'm tightening, the fracture propagates." Sova reached in with two of her primary arms, found the coupling, and held it. She could feel the vibration of the emergency systems through the metal, the ship's reduced heartbeat, the feeling of something running out of time very slowly. "Don't let it shift," he said, and started working. For 12 minutes she held the coupling, and he worked around her arms with a precision she found genuinely impressive. Not the showy precision of someone demonstrating competence, but the invisible precision of someone for whom accuracy was simply the baseline. He knew where his tools were without looking. He knew which bolt to tighten in which order. He worked in the near dark of a maintenance channel, lying on his back with someone else's arms in his workspace, and his concentration didn't waver once. "Done," he said finally. "You can let go." She let go. The coupling held. They backed out of the maintenance channel in silence. When they reached the engineering deck, Hale sat on the floor again with the same lack of ceremony as before, and drank from a water container he pulled from his kit bag, and looked at the time and said, "Ready for the restart sequence." Prav ran it from the engineering station. Hale watched the power load readings and called the timing for each stage. Not as instructions, exactly, just as information, calling out what he was seeing so Prav could confirm. Between propulsion stages 2 and 3, he said, "Hold," and they held for 30 seconds while the junction reading stabilized, and then he said, "Continue," and Prav continued. The primary propulsion came back online 7 minutes later. Life support processors 2 and 3 restarted in sequence after that, each one registering on the board with the specific finality of a problem becoming a former problem. The emergency lighting cycled off as the main panels came back up. The temperature in the engineering deck, which had dropped 2 degrees as the life support ran reduced, began to normalize. Sova stood in her engineering deck with full systems restored and 3 hours and 41 minutes remaining on her original reserve estimate, and looked at Marcus Hale, who was packing his kit bag with the same unhurried efficiency he'd brought to everything else. "You said 3 hours, she said. "I said maybe less." He didn't look up from the kit. "The junction took longer. The coolant housing made up time. Net result." He zipped the bag and stood. "You're going to want to replace the Section 7 power coupling properly at your next port stop. What I did will hold for 6 months, maybe 8, but it's a repair, not a rebuild. Don't push it past that." "Understood," she paused. "The power rerouting. What about it? Are you certain you're not filing a report?" He looked at her then, and something in his expression that had been professional and neutral shifted very slightly into something that was almost amusement. "I fix ships," he said. "What people do with ships after I fix them is their business." He picked up his kit bag. "Although I'd recommend not rerouting the coolant back up again. The housing I put in is better than the original, but it has limits." "Noted." He moved toward the airlock. At the threshold he stopped and turned back, which she hadn't expected. "Your second engineer," he said. Prav. The restart sequence he prepared was good. The staging was correct, and he added monitoring flags I didn't ask for, which caught a load variance in stage 4 before it became a problem. "Tell him that. You could tell him yourself. He'd take it better from you." He paused. "Also the original rerouting. Whoever did it did solid work. The connection points were clean. 4 months in the outer reaches with that configuration is longer than it should have been." Another pause. "Not recommending it, just noting it." Sova thought about Prav's middle arms when she'd told him someone else had found the Section 7 problem. "I'll tell him." Hale nodded once and went through the airlock. Sova stood in her engineering deck and listened to the endless meridian running at full capacity. The sound of all systems nominal, the particular hum of a ship that had been dying 2 hours ago and had decided not to, and thought about a human who worked alone in the outer reaches and fixed things without asking what they were and went on his way. Through the viewport she watched the persistent question undock and turn, and accelerate smoothly toward the transit point and become a point of light and then become nothing at all. Her comm chirped. It was Prav. "Captain," he said, in the tone of someone who has processed something uncomfortable and arrived at a position. The monitoring flags in the Stage 4 restart. I wanted to explain. I noticed a variance pattern in the load sequence that suggested. "It was good work," Sova said. A pause. The human said something. He mentioned it. Another pause, longer. "HM," Prav said, which among Vorrkai contained significant information. Then, the Section 7 junction. "I've been running the diagnostic logs. I should have caught it. The configuration made it difficult to see. Still," a pause. "He found it in 4 minutes. He's been doing this for 8 years, Sova said, in the outer reaches, alone." She looked at the viewport where the persistent question had been. "I think that teaches you to look at what's actually there instead of what's supposed to be there." Prav was quiet for a moment. "Captain, the Stage 4 variance flag, if it had propagated." "It didn't." "No," Prav said. "It didn't." Another pause. "I'm going to run a full diagnostic on the Section 7 coupling. The repair will hold, but I want to document the baseline for the next port stop." "Do that," Sova said. She stood alone in the engineering deck for another minute, listening to her ship run, feeling through the deck plates the steady, reliable thrum of systems that had no idea they'd almost stopped entirely. Then she went to file the voyage log and wrote in the section for external contractors. "Marcus Hale, independent, persistent question. Response time 11 minutes from beacon. Systems restored in 3 hours, 41 minutes. Recommended without reservation." She thought about adding something else and decided the log didn't need it. Outside, the outer reaches continued in their vast, indifferent silence, full of ships running configurations they weren't supposed to be running, and at least one human moving through the dark fixing things and asking nothing about them.